Good morning, grace and peace. Just stop by for a few minutes to leave this thought with you. God shared with me this morning. I think one of the most dangerous things that we as believers can do is to underestimate the power of influence in our lives. When you think in terms of the word apostasy, which means the falling away from. Typically, if you look it up in the dictionary, it speaks to religious belief or political belief, but it speaks to the falling away from. And what I'm offering you this morning is the fact that underestimating the impact of influence in our lives as believers is a huge mistake that I'm submitting to you often leads to apostasy that is so subtle we don't recognize until it's too late in many cases, right? That is to say, people don't wake up one day and say, later for church, maybe what I believe is not as serious or authentic or real or true as what I initially thought it was. That comes from somewhere. That mindset comes from somewhere. And what I'm offering to you is that it comes from the power of influence. Let me give you an example. People who like roller coasters, like me, I'm a lover of roller coasters. We didn't start out that way, right? One day we decided to ride the roller coaster for whatever reason. But I promise you that first experience on a real roller coaster was an experience of fear and terror. Fear and terror because, one, we're high up in the air. I'm not used to being this high. Source of fear. This thing is moving very fast. Do I trust this technology? Source of fear. And when it drops significantly. It drops hard. It takes your breath away. Source of fear. And so that first ride, I would venture to go as far as say is kind of terrorizing, right? And with that terror comes this rush of adrenaline. And when that ride is over, and which is typically only a couple of minutes, once that fear subsides and that adrenaline lingers, we tell ourselves that, oh, that was good. I want to do that. I want to experience that again. But the reality of the initial experience is that we were afraid. Once that fear subsides, that adrenaline rush is still there, and we keep doing it, and we ride, and we ride, and we ride again until there is no longer fear associated with being on that roller coaster. Now it's just the adrenaline rush. So in essence, what has happened is we've allowed this stimulus into our space, our present, and it has desensitized us to fear in that scenario. Because the initial ride, it was all about you were afraid. If you tell it, you were afraid. But because we were exposed to roller coasters long enough, we become desensitized to the fear associated with the height, the speed, the drop, and trusting this man-made technology that it won't fail us and that we'll come out unscathed. That's how apostasy works. We allow these influences into our circle, into our sphere, and initially we feel a certain way about these things. But over time, it subtly chips away at our position, our thoughts, our feelings, our ideologies until the point where we wake up one day and we don't think the way we used to think. We don't feel the way we used to feel. We don't move the way we used to feel. Let me give you another example. Horror movies. Anybody who's experienced a horror movie that in the first time they experience it, you do experience fear because of this outside stimulus that's putting us psychologically into these scary spaces, right? And so something happens on the screen and we jump and our heart races. And we have those moments of fear and terror, if you will, because, our senses don't identify that this is just a movie. We are immersed in the moment of what's happening on the screen. And if you're like me, I also like horror movies. When you first started watching horror movies, it was the fear, the fear, the fear, the fear. And then over time, as you experience more and more horror movies, the fear doesn't happen. There was a time where any kind of horror movie could make me jump. Now I'm at the point where if this scenario is not realistic, I'm not going to have an emotional response. It's not really going to scare me. If it's not realistic, it's not like Freddy Krueger and all of that. That doesn't move me because it is just not realistic. So I've become desensitized to the things on that screen simply because I've experienced them over and over and over and over and over. And so in the beginning, any little thing on that screen could make me jump and cause my heart to race and me to feel that adrenaline rush. But then over time, I can watch a horror movie. You can cut a man's head off, and I'll sit and watch, and then my thoughts go to, did they do a good job with that? Did that look realistic? But there is no fear involved. That's, again, how apostasy works. We keep allowing these things, these experiences, these outward stimuli into our space to the degree that they have made us desensitized. So let's circle it around and make it about the things of God, right? And so in each and every one of us, God has established a sense of right and wrong. You know, you know when what you're doing doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right because God put that in you. You know when what you're saying is probably wrong, you shouldn't do it, and you feel that in a very real space when we speak in terms of the things of God and the things that we know are not of God, right? Sort of our moral compass, our sense of what is morally right is what it is. And because of the things that we allow into our space, into our sphere of influence, we become desensitized to things that do not align with our faith. And so it does matter what stimulus we allow into our space. It does matter who we call our friends. It does matter who we hang out with. It does matter what we look at on TV and expose our eye gates and our ear gates to. I'm calling them gates because they're the entrance into who we are, our inner selves, the core of who we are, what we see and what we hear. It matters. And just to give you a passage of scripture, when Paul was talking to the church at Corinth, what had happened is he had written a letter addressing things like sexuality and marriage, all these things that were plaguing the church at Corinth. And overall, there were the letter was well received by this church. But then as life happened, the reality that there were false teachers and influences there in Corinth that were impacting the new converts, Paul had to write another letter. And that letter is 2 Corinthians. If you look at this around that 6th chapter, it's definitely the 6th chapter around that 17th verse. In the King James Version, Paul says, come out from among them and be separate. That speaks to Paul's understanding of the subtlety of influence and the impact it can have on us as believers. When you look at the historical data in the Bible, as the people of God, the children of Israel, took over new lands, the rule, the order, the demand from God was always, don't intermingle with these people. Get rid of them, destroy their stuff, because God understood the subtlety of the impact of influence on the minds of us as believers. In 2 Corinthians, Paul goes as far as to say, what fellowship, and I'm paraphrasing now because there's various translations out there. You may be reading King James, you may be reading the New Living Translation, you may be reading the Message Bible, but the spirit of what he's saying is, what fellowship does the light have with darkness, right? Because here's a reality. The things that you allow into your circle, and by your circle, I mean your life, are going to do one of two things. They're going to sensitize you to something or desensitize you to it. And for the sake of this post, what I am talking about is our presence in God, our God consciousness, our moral compass, right? The things that we allow in our spaces are going to impact that one way or another. And so for this reason, God had me to stop by to tell somebody that you have allowed in your space some people, some things, some influences that have desensitized you specifically to the presence of God. They have desensitized you specifically to the voice of God, to the degree that that when God is speaking to us, we can't hear him because of the distractions of influence of the things that we've allowed into our circle. And I don't know what your experience has been in the presence of God, but if you've ever experienced the presence of God to the degree that I have, and many of the viewers have, you know what the presence of God feels like. You know what the voice of God sounds like by reason of your very tangible experience. And yes, we can't see God, but just like the wind, we can see when he's moving. That's a very tangible thing when the trees bend and the grass blows and the water waves come as a result of the wind that we cannot see. We can also feel the wind when it hits our skin. It's a very tangible experience, and so it is in the things of God or in the presence of God. And it's for this reason that the Bible talks about not forsaking gathering together among believers, because among these believers, you can tangibly see God moves. I don't know if you've ever been, and I'm trying to watch my time here, if you've ever been in the house of God, and suddenly out of nowhere, everybody hits the floor and begins to dance as if it was planned or on cue. And it's not, it's just the move of God. That's something that you can experience tangibly and see it, even if it doesn't hit you and you don't dance, but you can be in the service and see what's happening and the worship happening and taking place. And all of a sudden, 300 people jump up at the same time and begin to dance. And the musicians, if they're cued in, will get right there with them. And it happens. That's a tangible experience. It is a tangible experience when you're in the house of the Lord, in the presence of God, and God begins to speak to you, and you clearly hear him dealing with you about your stuff, about your circle, about the things you're saying, about the things you're doing, because there is no distraction of the world in that moment, because you are amongst the body of believers and everybody is in the same place at the same time with the same consciousness. God sent me to tell somebody, you're losing that and have lost it because or by reason of the people that you call your friends. And that's a term that we use so loosely in our day and age. And we call everybody our friends, but they're not our friends. And we associate with just anybody and everybody. And we tell ourselves, I don't want to judge them. I don't want to look down on them or think I'm better than them. While at the same time, the things that you hear them say they did and do should be shocking to you. You did what? You went where? If it's no longer shocking to you, it's because you've been desensitized in your God consciousness and your sense of right and wrong to the degree that you don't even see sin as sin anymore. You know, the masses have said this is okay. And so you've somehow made it okay by reason of the subtle influence of what you allow in your life. Let me give you more examples. What is it that you're choosing to look at on TV? Some of us live alone and TV is our companion, so to speak, the background noise. What are the programs that you are choosing to be your background noise or to be your companion or to put you to sleep at night because your brain won't cut off enough for you to drift off to sleep? What are the sources of stimulation that you are choosing? When you get up in the morning, do you start your day in the presence of God? Or do you start your day on social media? And by in the presence of God, I mean simply being still and being God conscious and making room and commitment for time separated specifically to be influenced and in his presence. You see, I could wake up and pray and meditate and think about scripture and think about life and think about God and talking to him the same way I'm talking to you all here in this post, and give room for him and make a commitment for that time every morning. because it's a challenge to do at night because you've been stimulated all day by all sorts of things. And so you now have to come down, if you will. Or I could wake up in the morning and start my day on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and fill my gates with all of these things that are subtly whittling away at my God consciousness, my moral compass, to the degree that the things that I found offensive or the things that I looked at and in my inner self said, no, that's wrong. That's not right. That's ungodly, if you will. I've allowed these things, or you have allowed these things, or we have allowed these things so much room in our lives until our moral compass is no longer pointing north or pointing to God, but rather pointing to what appeals to our feelings, our emotions, or specifically this flesh. And Paul said it best when he said, no good thing dwells in this flesh. And what he said is, I know better about certain things. I'm paraphrasing here. My time is almost up. The things that I know that I should do, the things that are right, the things that I should be doing, those are not the things that I find myself doing, but I find myself doing the things that I know that's not right. And the point that he's making, this flesh is all about self-gratification. It's not about being submitted to the will of God. It's not about what's right in the eyesight of God or based on God's moral law or moral standards. It's all about what feels good to me. And just because a thing feels good to me doesn't mean it's good for me. Just like sugar. Sugar is poison. But anybody on this post knows that sugar creates a great feeling, but it is poison and it is killing us, and it is a source of a whole lot of illness in our culture. Yet we keep doing it knowing that this is a problem, right? The sphere of influence that has whittled away at our moral compass, our God conscious, is what God has sent me to tell somebody. There's some people you've allowed into your circle that you labeled them friends, and they have desensitized you to the presence of God in your life, so much so that when God says go left, you can't even hear him because of the distraction of the people and the stimulus that they bring into your life that you've allowed. You have desensitized yourself to the presence of God, the Spirit of God, the voice of God, by reason of the things you choose to entertain yourself with, whether it's social media, whether it's the movies you attend, whether it's the people that you have around you. There is a reason the wisdom of God says, come out and be separate. There's a reason the wisdom of God says, don't intermingle with those people. And by those, we mean people who do not believe as we believe, because apostasy begins so subtly that we don't recognize it as such. And so we look at the world and we see it through a different lens, because the lens of the Spirit of God that rests in us has been tainted because we've become desensitized here. And so now our actions have changed, our words have changed, and our God consciousness has changed to the degree that we are ineffective, to the degree that we are living beneath our privilege, to the degree that God can't use us to be a blessing to others the way that he's intended it to be. It's time to take a moment and take a look at what you've surrounded yourself with and ask yourself the question: does this align with what I know to be the truth about who God called me to be? Does this align with what I know to be the truth about God's expectation of believers? And if it doesn't, why is it in your sphere of influence? You see, you get to decide what you will allow into your ears, what you will allow into your eyes. But somehow or another, the subtlety of the enemy has convinced us that these things that are impacting us are not impacting us, and it's just entertainment. God sent me to tell you it's not just entertainment. It's not just drinks with friends. It's just not laughter. Come out from among them and be separate.